Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? Friday, December 23rd, 2016. I've decided to go right ahead and record up a new show full of new content for you. Maybe we'll take Monday off and perhaps leave it at that, unless I find myself extraordinarily bored and with an extraordinarily quiet room to record in. I think Monday off probably makes the most sense for a lot of other folks too, so we're going to record this Friday piece for you. That, of course, means we won't be able to have our regular Friday visit with Josie Duffy Rice 2 weeks in a row. I know. I miss having her around, having her voice added to the show. We'll try and make good on it with super great, totally awesome segments on Fridays to come, or perhaps occasionally Thursdays as well. I know it's a little bit tough for her to keep that schedule just like me. We haven't really nailed it down yet. Joan, like clockwork, but it's taken a long time to get there. And of course, she's off next week too. So, 'tis the season, as they say. So, where did I want to bring you first thing in the morning on Friday? Well, I felt like I really needed to continue with the storyline we left off with. Not the few items that I dropped on you on the way out the door on Thursday, but with the larger story of Donald Trump, his background in reality television, our sincere doubts about whether or not The Apprentice really qualifies as reality television, or whether anything does. And I've heard from a couple of people throughout the day on Thursday, just really expressing the same doubt, and really doubts that there's anybody left in America that could possibly believe that reality television really is just uncut reality. But I'll bet there's more of them than you think. But in wrapping that story up yesterday, I mentioned to you that I had seen somewhere a story that really filled in a lot of the blanks about just how heavily manipulated, let's say, the footage for a reality show like The Apprentice, and maybe The Apprentice in particular, how heavily edited and how heavily manipulated this stuff is in order to make it look like there's a coherent storyline where a supposedly unscripted, although sometimes these things are scripted, but a supposedly unscripted footage of I don't know what, life in in some cases life in the house with all the cameras in it, or life in the boardroom with The Apprentice, but to make what is sometimes a messy ad hoc process, not unlike doing a live radio show, or even pretending to do a live radio show but actually doing it on tape, taking a look at it after production and editing it into a storyline that makes sense. A couple of the people I spoke with about reality television and the nature of it after yesterday's show, and after commenting on the stories we read on yesterday's show on Twitter, were telling me about what it's like to be in the production business of shows like this, and how basically the shows are written, things like The Apprentice, sort of after the fact. They get the ideas together, what the challenges are going to be, etc. I didn't really watch the show very closely. I saw snippets of it here and there, so I only have the vaguest idea of how the show itself actually operated episode to episode. But the people involved in production of shows like this tell me that what would ordinarily pass as the writing process passes for the editing process in a reality show like this. In other words, they put the premise out there of what the challenge is going to be. They film everything as it happens, and then afterwards they kind of have to decide in editing how to make this a storyline that's coherent, that makes sense, that will be understood by the viewers, and will fit in the time allotted. But in addition, there was, as I was reading to you the story yesterday, I knew hanging out there somewhere was an article that I had seen that described a very specific process of trying to piece together a storyline that would make sense in The Apprentice, and that it was somewhat difficult because of, one, of the nature of the show, and two, the nature of the star of the show, that Donald Trump didn't really care to put in the time to make the show coherent or the storylines work. He wanted to fire people based on whatever I feel like, and that would make a great show, not because it would demonstrate a coherent business sense, but rather whatever he did was great. So just you guys make it look, I don't care about the story. You guys just make it make sense. And I don't know if we ever actually read it on the air. The name of the publication doesn't ring a bell. It probably would if I had read it out loud before. Maybe I did, maybe I didn't. But I found it, you know how you find these things. I went Googling the various terms that I recall as having been a part of the story, and the purple link. Oh, that's it. I've read it, right? All the other blue ones, I never clicked on those. Cookies tell me about my life, I guess, my search history. All right, well, don't look at the rest of it. It's probably not flattering. Anyway, this is a piece from a publication called Cinemontage, the Journal of the Motion Picture Editors Guild. Very interesting. Speaking of the Editors Guild, before I even get into it, I'll have to look back and scroll back somewhere. I know. I retweeted it. That's how I can keep track of these things. And eventually I'll find it. But I'll let you know who it was that I was conversing with, who was a writer, not for a reality show, but for, as they said, in scripted television, but around the same time as the explosion of the reality TV phenomenon. Here we are. Found it here. It's, I imagine that we're talking about a guy by the name of Robert Greene, and I guess his middle initial is O, but you know how it is with Twitter and no spaces, so it looks like Robo Green, but it's not. I'm sure it's Rob O. Green. I guess. That's and there's some links we can follow. Anyway, he's got the experience that we're talking about here, and that was writing experience. And let me just say, of course, I looked at his profile. There's something Twitter needs to fix the way it deals with, clicking through from one thing to the next. Anyway, let's see. Here's Rob's first tweet to me. He says, I worked in scripted TV back then, and I constantly had to explain to people that reality, quote unquote reality TV, also had writers, which confused them. And I can imagine why it would confuse them. It sounds a little weird. What do you mean reality TV has writers? I guess people, there was more discussion about that fact later on. And as I recall, it was Jay Aykroyd weighing in on that and saying, do people really not get that now? And they might get it more now, but apparently at the time they were like, what are you talking about? There's writers. How can you write a reality show? You just film and that's that. He had two other tweets that I thought were instructive. It was irony level 2. He said those writers, the writers on the reality shows, had to sue to get into the Writers Guild as opposed to the Editors Guild, right? Because to accept them as writers would mean that reality TV was not reality. And I guess that just blew too many minds, but they had to sue to get into the Writers Guild, which I thought was a pretty liberal and open-minded organization. But you want to keep things pure. Everybody loves purity, and maybe the more liberal you get, the more you love purity. But imagine having that fight. Irony level 3, he also adds, instead of calling them writers, they were editors, even though the shows were, as he puts it, written in post. Thus, the guild issues. So they called their writers editors, because that's really more of what they were trying to do. But it's more than just editing. I mean, editors do more than just say, stop the scene here and start the scene there. And they make all kinds of incredibly important creative decisions. But I would imagine for a show like this, it becomes even more important. They've got to have a writer's story sense, which is different from an editor's story sense. But they've got to have both because they have to make the story happen, particularly when the footage that you've captured for whatever it is that the Donald was doing that day doesn't really make any sense when you take a look back at it and you realize this story doesn't hang together. We can air it as is. This is what happened. The reality of what happened is here. But the problem is that it makes Donald Trump look like an incoherent boob. And as much as he likes boobs, that's not what he was looking for. It makes him look like an idiot. He wants to look like a business genius. And it has to work out for the best. And sometimes they needed to go and film new things. I'll let you read the story. You go ahead. I'll wait here. This is not likely going to work because it doesn't have a visual component. I'll tell you what. I will read the story for you instead, and then we'll all decide. This was back in October this year. Editing Trump. The making of a reality TV star who would be president. And this is in October. They didn't know that he would be president, but they were kidding. And now he is. Well, now he will be. Right. If you're listening to this next year as a rerun, he is. Unless his doctor was wrong and he dropped dead. We'll figure it out later. Anyway, the writer here is a guy by the name of A.J. Cataline. I'm no idea what that Catalini, I don't know. Catolline. Cataline. AJ, tell me. How do you want me to pronounce that? Okay. He's the writer and an editor. So I told you, these guys do it all. Anyway, last week, it says, the filmmaker Judd Apatow tweeted what all of America was thinking. Can you imagine what the editors of The Apprentice are sitting on? It must be hundreds of hours of madness. In this sense, he meant the footage that they're sitting on. I don't really want to guess what the editors of The Apprentice are sitting on, more literally. But anyway, this would, of course, have been in reference to, having found the footage from Access Hollywood and then hearing rumors that there was horrible stuff in the raw, unused footage of The Apprentice, but we never got to see it. Now, Tom Arnold apparently says he's got some of it. Somebody has to take a risk here and put that stuff out. It would be interesting. It wouldn't unprecedented him, but it would be interesting to know anyway. So what else does AJ have for us? After last Friday's release of the controversial outtake footage from a 2005 episode of the entertainment series Access Hollywood, series? All right. Intense media speculation is currently swirling about what additional revealing audio and video could exist, including raw footage from the Apprentice tapes. The show's producer, Bill Pruitt, right, who we were talking about yesterday, tweeted on Saturday, as producer on season 1 and 2 of #The Apprentice, really. I assure you, when it comes to Trump tapes, there are far worse. #just the beginning. By the way, Trump tapes was also a hashtag, but I didn't feel it necessary to tell you. Until now. So, Cinemontage set out to speak to the picture editors who worked on the original seasons of the NBC show The Apprentice from 2004 to 2007. I guess they don't even count it. When it became Celebrity Apprentice, I guess there's less, I don't know, maybe it seems like less of a violation of norms, again, to be that artificial about your quote-unquote reality TV. Anyway, they shared their recollections that the image of its star, Donald Trump, was carefully crafted and manufactured in post-production to feature a persona of success, leadership, and glamour, despite the raw footage of the reality star that was often a disaster. There were many moments between shooting when the cameras were rolling and the microphones were hot, when Trump may have made off-color remarks. Those moments hit the cutting room floor, as you would expect them to do, of course, in the production of the show. But anyway, we were told not to show anything that was considered too much of a peek behind the curtain, remembered Jonathan Braun, B-R-A-U-N-A-C-E. I guess that's the editor's organization there, or accrediting organization. I don't know. I'm not a part of the film industry. Maybe you guys know. So I think this is very interesting kind of comment too. Like, obviously they're not going to just show outtakes. Nobody shows you might in the movies as a gag reel at the end, but you don't put the garbage or the irrelevant stuff or the occasional, F-bomb into the show. Or sometimes they do. They just bleep it. But there's more than that going on here, right? No, don't show anything that's considered too much of a peek behind the curtain. Trump is an image freak, right? Okay. So, that's what Jonathan Braun has to say. He worked as the supervising editor on the first 6 seasons of the show, including one as a co-producer. And so here, more quotes from him. Make Trump look good. Make him look wealthy. Legitimate. That's the quote. That was our objective. But that's what we do as editors anyway, right? So it wasn't considered quite as big a deal. And I'm sure at the time, well, who cares? It's a show about a rich guy. He's not as rich. He's not as classy. He's not smart. But we need him for the show's purposes to look like he's all of those things and more. Fine. We'll do it. If the assignment was make him look presidential and then we'll elect him president and you just keep doing it, people would say, the hell with that. I'm not going to do it. They didn't know what they were in for. Cinemontage spoke with editors who worked on the show in its original run, featuring Trump. Others declined to comment, and one editor spoke on condition of anonymity, presumably because they are still under the terms of a non-disclosure agreement and fear any reprisal, and reported intense pressure from the show's production company, Mark Burnett Productions. There we go. I've put the right emphasis on it. The company has released a statement denying it has threatened anyone with litigation for revealing information about the show. Interesting. We worked as a team of 4 editors per each episode, and each episode had a lead editor and a story producer, recalled Jim Ruxin, ACE as well, who worked on the first 4 seasons. There were 2 specialist editors who cut only the boardrooms. It's a great example of a strong team of editors working together. Very interesting. In creating the show's first few episodes in the first season, where it's really critical, you really have to sell the show, the editors had little idea they were working on what would become an iconic show, a hit that would help define a style for a generation of reality TV to come, and one that would create a persona for the show's star, with his catchphrase, "You're fired," and who would use the show's success to launch a campaign for president of the United States. They clearly could have no idea of that. But more importantly, of course, in the interim, he used the show to launch a campaign to rehabilitate his image as a businessman and as a success. He really, everything that came after, he piggybacked on The Apprentice, and he used ways to cross-promote everything. It's illustrated by a photo that interrupts our text here. That is, it's captioned, "A sign advertising Trump's television show, The Apprentice, hangs on Trump Towers in New York City in 2004. The photo provided courtesy of NBC, and it is right over the entrance, the famous entrance that we see. But the stupid, brassy, plated Trump Tower entrance, along with the gold paint on the glass that says it's open to the public every day from 10 a.m. to 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. We see it all the time. It's on C-SPAN now. They have a camera constantly showing who's going in and out. Well, they have this giant banner strung across it, which looks cheesy as hell. For the gold entryway and the beautiful atrium and everything, there's this giant banner on there. It says, you're fired, The Apprentice, Thursdays on NBC. Thank you to the city of New York for making this hit show possible. It says, along with another one of those stupid, over-the-top melodramatic photos of Trump, like pouting at the camera and buttoning his coat. The very business-like pose. But, what cheap garbage is this? This is supposed to be like an uptown, upscale business and condominium development, and it's got the boss's face, in addition to having Trump all over it. It now he's using it for advertising for a giant banner, inuring to the benefit of no one but himself. But who's going to argue? It's Trump Tower. But meanwhile, it's like, I live here. Get this crap. Whatever. But again, piggybacking on everything. And then, of course, we heard all the stories later on about how product placement on the show will make a challenge, selling or doing something for this company or whatever, and they give me free crap as a result. Just everything builds on it. He knew I don't think he knew he was going to be running for president at that point, or whether it would be relevant at all to that, although he had surely bought into a businessman should be president trope. But anyway, back to the story. When cuts of the first and second episodes of season 1 went to Trump, everyone at Burnett Productions was eager to see how the show would turn out, said Ruxin. We asked our producer what Trump thought of our episode, Ruxin continued, and the only note that came back said he wanted a close-up shot of himself in the boardroom extended. It was nothing that 30 frames didn't fix, but he caught it. It was an appropriate note to give, although I bet it surprised them coming from like a first-time reality TV star. But it's interesting. Like a more seasoned star, you would say, well, of course he wants the shot of him extended, but he knows what he's doing. Whereas, I guess with this guy, they just say, he's just a wacko narcissist. But okay, 30 more frames. Fine. And it worked out great, blah, 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 and so now he's a TV genius. But that's his one note. How'd you like the show, Mr. Trump? Pretty good, but it should have focused on my face for a lot longer when I was in the boardroom, because I was really giving a great blue steel, and you cut away from me. So there you go. Trump basked in the glow of the invisible art of editing. We made him look good, or we made him look great, at all costs, the quote concludes. A grand editorial struggle on the show was to make the stars' decisions about which contestant was fired each episode look legitimate. Can I read that one to you again? A grand editorial struggle on the show was to make the stars' decisions about which contestant was fired look legitimate, because they were as random as hell and dumb as you ever saw, and they had to figure out a way afterwards. I should let him tell the story. I just find it really amazing. I want to tell it, but okay, I didn't write this story. The editors reported that when the boardroom was shot, the big "you're fired" scene, the producers would offer their observations about who did well in the challenges and deserved to stay, and who was not pulling his or her weight and deserved to go. But invariably, Trump would ignore factual information and instead go with his gut, which got bigger over the years. Trump would often make arbitrary decisions which had nothing to do with people's merit. Confirmed another season 1 editor who requested anonymity, he'd make decisions based on whom he liked or disliked personally, whether it be for looks or lifestyle, or he'd keep someone that would make good TV, according to Trump. Setting up story beats to justify the contestant that Trump ultimately fired required all kinds of editorial gymnastics, as they call it here, according to the show's editors, manipulating footage to invent a story point that did not exist organically is now, I'm sure, common in reality TV editing, although with The Apprentice, it proved a tremendous feat. We'd often be shocked at whomever Trump chose to fire, Braun explained. Our first priority on every episode like that was to reverse engineer the show to make it look like his judgment had some basis in reality. Sometimes it would be very hard to do because the person he chose did nothing wrong anyway. We had to figure out how to edit the show to make it work, to show the people he chose to fire as looking bad, even if they had done a great job. This is not surprising for reality TV. Well, I mean, it's surprising to those of us who, I guess, don't think very much about how is reality TV really made. I don't care. I don't watch reality TV. Who gives a crap? I have watched some reality-ish TV shows in the past, and some of them were interesting, more for the content of what was going on. Interestingly, one of them was one that Rob Green made mention of, Project Greenlight. I thought that was sort of an interesting concept. I watched one season of it and said, meh, all right, I'm not coming back for a second season. But he talked a lot in our Twitter conversations about how he knew some of the people involved in the show, and it was painful to watch some of the show's or some of the writers who were helping with the scripts for the projects be made to look like they were terrible or stupid and didn't know what they were doing. And they needed that for the story because that was the story that lost. Whatever. You get the idea here? It's amazing that this happens. It's amazing that people don't really think about it, even, that it would happen. But it makes a certain amount of sense in the end. And ultimately, who cares? Because it's just a show. But I guess if you were into it for the reality of it, you might feel gypped. Worse, he's still making his decisions this way, and he's going to be president of the United States. I'll cheat a little bit and break down the false time thing that we've set up for ourselves. This being to you, Friday, December 23rd. But it's actually, as I'm recording it, it's the afternoon, it's the evening of December 22nd. And what was just going on Twitter, among other things, which perhaps we can discuss, was the revelation that at some point here, Sahil Kapoor tweeted this one. And he says, according to the Daily Caller, Trump worried that Bob Corker was too short to be Secretary of State. We just got done talking yesterday about, he's got a mustache. John Bolton, he's got a mustache. He doesn't look like a Secretary of State. Bob Corker can't be it either because he's too short. There's a screen grab here and a photo that goes with it. You can see why he would. Bob Corker is considerably shorter than Donald Trump, but he can't be a Secretary of State. You could be Undersecretary of State, but Secretary of State, no. And imagine that. Once again, now he's making real-life decisions with real-life implications, and it's still just like the reality TV thing. It's my gut says the guy's too short. Why would I have a gut feeling about somebody being tall enough to be Secretary of State? Because, to him, you got to have a commanding presence when you enter a room, and if you're short, you can't have that. That's the way he thinks, because everything is about wiener to him, basically. That's why he's obsessed with his hands. Anyway, it's fine if he's just wasting everybody's time on The Apprentice, I guess, except, supposedly there's money at stake there. And if that was really a game show of some kind, wouldn't you be pissed if you were a contestant on a game show and you lost based on nothing? But, I'm sure you sign your life away to the show when you agree to be on it. I mean, there was that story a while back. This one I found in Pocket. This other one I had to go back to Google for. You remember that there was briefly a flap about the fact that people on The Apprentice, when they signed their contracts, they had to agree to appear nude, possibly, on The Apprentice. Do you remember that? If not, I'll dig it up. Just by way of proving that it really did happen. It is true. I don't need to read you the story. What more do you want to know? The Daily Beast reported it. There it is. Donald Trump's apprentices had to agree to go nude. I don't think anybody ever did, but makes for fun copy. Anyway, so I'm sure based on that, you probably had to sign your life away, and the fact that, and you had to agree to, whatever our judges' decisions are, whoever the judge is, what I say goes. You can't appeal. There's no appeal from my firing you for no reason. So I'm sure nobody ever even tried. Anyway, so here it is. He's making decisions based on who he likes or dislikes personally, based on looks or anything else, and he'd keep someone that would make good TV even if they were terrible, right? Setting up story beats to justify the contestants, right? All kinds of editorial gymnastics, and it proved a particular feat. We already read about this one, and basically that it was the job of the editors to figure out how to make the show work even when he made completely idiotic decisions about who got fired and who didn't. Also, and here's something interesting that will also play into his being president and also, of course, contradicts claims that he makes about himself all the time. but who cares? We all know he's a narcissistic idiot, so he's not even close to the truth, I'm sure. Says also, Trump was never good with facts and numbers, the editor said, and they needed to fix his mistakes frequently. I wonder if they had to have him like sit around and put him back in the chair and say, I need you to say 3 million, because you kept saying 2 million and it was wrong, and I need you to, for the story, you got to say 3 million. 3 million. Yeah, but with more emphasis on the 3, because you thought, all right, ready? 3 million. No, again, sir, I want you to say like 3 million. That's the important part. Okay, great, no problem. 3 million. What's the matter? You weren't ready this time? All right, ready? 1, 2, 3 million. Oh, God. This is great. Well, it's going to be an Alec Baldwin sketch. Free writing for Saturday Night Live. All right, so they had to fix his mistakes. Didn't he claim, I have a great memory, one of the greatest brains, I'm so fantastic, I'm a genius. He would say things like, we had 1 million applicants, and we chose this small group to be contestants on the show, Braun recalled. And I would turn to my producer and say, 1 million applicants? Really? And the producer would shake his head. No. Trump would just take numbers and throw them around. I mean, from season 1 to season 2, he said his net worth tripled. One day, he said he had $1 billion, and then later, it would be $3 billion. He just made stuff up. Yeah, well, we're getting used to that now. Music, apparently, also played a critical role to boost the star's persona of success. We would always use some variation of a ridiculous Caesar fanfare cue when Trump walked into whatever setting it was, lifting him up as the ultimate arbiter of whatever he wanted to do. Well, it says arbitrator here, which I don't think is the right word, but okay. That's a direct quote from Stephen Frederick, who edited on the first 3 seasons. He presented himself as American royalty, Braun suggested. We used the shot of him coming down the escalator at Trump Tower many times, and we would always use the same music cue. It was like this funk pimp walk. Was it? I don't know. I have no idea. The music would support the way he came off, like the head pimp in charge. If Trump came down hard on criticizing somebody, we would ramp up the tension in the music. It's an artificial reality, right? That's what they're doing. We tried to make the music legitimize his characteristics, which I'm sure went a long, long way, as we were discussing yesterday, towards making him into the figure that American voters, the voters who liked him anyway, thought he was. It was a manufactured image. They must have been wondering, where's the music when he's doing things? Are there not, musical cues? It's like seeing Darth Vader walk in and either there's no music or they're playing Baby Elephant Walk or something. The whole thing's gone. Of course you can't have Darth Vader. He's not Darth Vader without the Darth Vader Death March or whatever the hell they called that musical cue, right? In season 1, here, this is funny too, right? Imagine the different outcomes we could have had if the editors and producers had viewed things just slightly differently. This was very surprising, I thought. In season 1, the editors thought the show was a comedy. They thought they were making a comedy. We approached the edit with humor. We tried to play Donald as over the top, because that's the way he is, right? And that's why everyone regarded him as such a joke, even as a presidential candidate. He would say things that were ludicrous. I'm the most successful guy. Whenever we were watching him tweet, before he was a declared candidate, when he really started to really catch on Twitter, not politically, but just people were just watching him. He was always, the big joke in our house was always, many people come up to me and they say, Donald, why are you the greatest tweeter in the world? And I say, it's just a natural thing. He would tweet like that about himself. Many people are saying that my latest project is the most fantastic, whatever it is, in the world. Really world class. People who and trust who are important, wealthy people. I love the way he would describe them. Important, wealthy people who really know luxury say that the Donald Trump pre-moistened rectal wipes are the most classy and delicious, by the way, way of wiping your bottom. What? That doesn't make any sense. It's disgusting. What are you talking about? the Trump Tower is the premier address in New York City. It's not. It's crap. It's full of gangsters and weirdos and pimps. You know, it's horrible looking. It's an abomination. But no, it's the most fantastic. People say it belongs. I was recently contacted, by the way, by many architecture professors at the finest schools in the country, including DeVry Institute, and they want to feature me as the designer of Trump Tower, which he's not. These kinds of claims. People are always coming up with beautiful, important women want to sleep with me. Remember the whole John Miller stuff, the fake publicist. It's unbelievable. Anyway, so of course that's hilarious. I have a good time with it. They thought they'd have a good time with it too. We're making a comedy. That's what they thought was happening. Before they knew what the show was, just shoot this thing. This is the premise. Shoot it. Make a show out of it. It could be anything. The first obvious option was a comedy. Right? You would see the inside of his apartment, the Trump Tower. It was so ostentatious, dripping in gold, the height of egotism. And he was so proud of it. We never took the guy too seriously. We thought the audience would find it funny and entertaining. And I think people did. But I think also people started to believe in the image they were seeing because Americans are disgusting. So there you go. Frederick agreed. If we played Trump for a fool, which would have been extremely easy, the show would not have had the weight that it had. As a show about business, which, by the way, it had zero weight as an actual show about business, but it was presented that way, and America ate it up that way. This is business. This is how business is done. He's a businessman. But it could easily have been a comedy. It probably wouldn't have been as big a hit. They made the right decision with respect to how to play the show, to make it the biggest hit possible. That's true. As a comedy, it's probably, one or two shots at it, maybe 2 seasons, and then gone. And I guess, I don't know. I mean, didn't the Celebrity Apprentice become kind of more of that? I guess that was only possible, though, because they hadn't played the original as a comedy, and because they played it serious, the camp value of having celebrities do it was higher. It was a legitimate thing you could do. If it was just, here's a bunch of idiots doing a comedy, and now we're going to have celebrities do it, I don't know if it would have worked as well. But so they made the right decision in terms of bottom line, but it sure would have been easy to make this into a comedy. I never really thought about that. So, okay, as they said, if they had played Trump for a fool, which would have been extremely easy, the show wouldn't have had the weight that it had. As a show about business, about contestants who wanted to get a job and succeed, he added, they thought of Donald as a successful person. The point of the show was to make him look legitimate and important. And so they did. But we skipped over a part here that probably should have rung a bell for you in the political sense, right? They wanted to make it a show about contestants who wanted to get a job and succeed, right? And we've just been in analyzing the results of the actual election. We've just been talking about how badly large swaths of the country wanted the election to be about getting a job and succeeding. And he was the guy. They had purposefully built him. He had no ability to do this, but through the magic of editing and the suspension of disbelief that comes with watching entertainment of any kind, even if you think it's reality, it's reality, but music plays every time somebody walks into a room. Okay, sure, that's just like reality. But the point of the show was to turn him into the guy that has the ability to create situations where people can get jobs and succeed, even though it's, if you stop and think about the premise, well, the premise of almost any show or movie you would watch, the whole thing will fall apart if you've got a brain in your head. And, that's not always the case. But especially for those of you who don't have brains in your head, or the people who love them, it would be very easy, of course, to watch this thing and to think, yeah, he can go into any situation and turn it into a way of making a profit and therefore of sustaining jobs. Even as the premise, as I understand it, was usually something totally artificial. Occasionally it was maybe grounded in reality in that they had done some product placement deal or something. But if the real premise of each episode is, I'm going to make up some stupid task and you have to do it, and whoever does it best moves on, or whatever the premise was, but it's all, bought and paid for. Like, we'll get you the product and if things have to be bought, if product has to be bought, or there needs to be some money spent on infrastructure to make the task doable, the magic of television will make that happen, and then we'll just hand you all the stuff, and then you could just go and sell, and we'll see who's a good salesman. That's all well and good if all you're trying to do is find out who's a good salesman. But in terms of like, I create jobs. Well, you create jobs because NBC decided they need to have a show, and they were handed a budget and said, we need $500,000 to buy trinkets for these people to sell, and you got to make a booth and set it up and rent some space and all that other garbage that goes into actually creating jobs. We'll just wave a wand at all of that and then say, poof, you got a job. Well, that's a little too abstract, I think, a point to be distilled out of it by people who want to watch for entertainment purposes and are transported, for whatever reason, by this stupid show. Back to the story here. Braun agreed that Trump benefited from the power of editing. I would say so. It was all about his brand, whatever it took to build up his brand and make him look like a legitimate success. That was extraordinarily important, and so I'm sure the Mark Burnett company side of things and NBC would agree that it was their responsibility to do that. The show was a success because people wanted to compete to get a job and be successful, and he was in the business of pretending to be the most successful guy in the world. And this would also have been around the time that he was, I think, right? Isn't it around the time that he's also pushing Trump University? The idea of which is, buy my seminars, I'll teach you to be successful. That's why the show is called The Apprentice. I'm going to pass my skills on to you. If it's clear from the show that he's without skill and is just a buffoon and a dope, who wants to be apprenticed to that? I do, but, that's because I did. All right. Well, anyway, nobody's going to want to do that. So they had to do it in order to protect the property. The value of the show is he's got to look like he knows what he's doing and like he's making the right decisions despite it all. It has to come off almost as if by magic. Even when to all other eyes it looks like this one is the success and that one's the failure, it has to be the case that he is able to see through that and choose the right one where the rest of us would have blown the call completely. It has to be played that way. Not he's an idiot and he chose the hot blonde to go on and got rid of the either the dude who's too handsome because he might be a rival for this hot blonde or whatever premise he was using to dismiss people from the show. It can't be about that because that's not successful businessman thing. It has to be about something else. That gets fixed in editing. So, you got to make him look like a legitimate success, the editor explained. I guess we're talking about Braun here. The lesson I take away from it is that you've got to be careful when you think you're being tongue-in-cheek or showing something as ridiculous, because people might take it seriously. I've certainly learned that lesson on Twitter, right? Obviously, there is a huge group of Americans who think, look how successful Trump was on The Apprentice. They haven't yet, and probably never will, realize this guy is a con man, and they are playing the mark. That's his quote. I didn't make it up. As for media speculation about what potentially offensive sound or footage of Trump exists in outtakes or between scenes, the editors revealed that they witnessed such occurrences, whether or not these sound bites or clips had been preserved. Trump's favorite word, just in case this is where you become interested in this stuff, what did he really say behind the scenes? Trump's favorite word was drill. Yeah, you know what he's talking about. Not, I'm going to get a nice new Black & Decker drill, right? His favorite word was drill. He's always saying between takes, I'd like to drill her, lewdly referring to the female crew members working on the set. They can't even escape, right? He couldn't help himself making comments about women and the way they looked. He also had comments about women he found less attractive. There was no question he took the men a lot more seriously than the women. Omarosa Manigault, right? Remember her? Says here, was the black female contestant who infamously made it into the final 8 contestants in the first season of the show. Infamously, all right. Braun recalled one scene in which her teammates confronted her about lying, and the editors held on the shot for over a minute, which is uncommon in the fast pace of TV editing. We held on her just lying right to camera, with her saying, "No, I never said this or that," he said. It was astounding. You could just see her lying, and it was the best edit I saw in the show, because it was no edit. Very interesting. Of course, she's actually hung on all this time and has involved herself in the transition, and who knows, she may end up in government as well. How fantastic. Well, look, liars end up in government all the time. Braun has a theory on why Trump kept her around before eventually firing her. We had to cut out a scene where Omarosa got hit with some falling piece of plaster or material on one of Trump's construction sites. That's what Braun reveals. He says it was a little thing, but she made a big stink about it. And we had her talking about how she was going to sue Trump and blah, blah, blah. But it sure seemed like she had made some deal with him behind the scenes, because all of a sudden, after this incident, Donald loved her. They became thick as thieves after that. And she's working with him to this day as campaign surrogate. And she still makes stuff up. That is some story. She's got something over him. I'm going to sue you. But I guess she didn't. Often, Trump would be needed to record a wild line of dialogue to be inserted into the cut to fix a story point. I had been wondering about that. Braun remembered that the star would be coordinating the recording session via telephone with a woman producer hired by the show in New York. So, in addition to having to record these things, it sounds like there's an issue with dealing with this woman producer. Listening on the line to the recording session at Trump Tower, Braun recalls Donald was always telling this woman producer to go get me a Diet Coke. Remember, by the way, he tweeted that one time, I've never seen a thin person drinking a Diet Coke. Go get me a Diet Coke. And she would reply, but Donald, I need to be here to help record this dialogue. And Trump would reply, no, you don't. Go get me a Diet Coke. This isn't that big of a deal, but it struck me as insensitive. Me too. Okay, Pamela Maloof, another ACE, who was one of the editors on the 3 seasons of The Apprentice, has a more balanced view, we'll see, of her experience on the show. I edited the competing teams, which encompassed their trials and tribulations as they completed the task in an effort for their team to win, she said. Another editor would cut the scene where Trump gives the team their assignments, and another would cut the boardrooms, the rewards, etc. Anything I heard about Trump was hearsay, and although I did edit an occasional scene with Trump, nothing I saw was abnormal or offensive or even worthy of note, she added. I never saw Trump be anything other than a consummate professional in the material I worked on. I objectively edited him to look as good as I could, as I would with any other host or celebrity on a show I was editing. Braun also mentioned a scene of Trump in his limousine. He was on the phone, threatening somebody with a lawsuit and getting really heated, saying he's going to sue somebody, run you into the ground, you can't do this to Donald Trump, and he was going to take his every last penny, the editor recalled. Then he hung up the phone, turned directly to the camera, and said, do you think he bought that? I thought it was a great moment. If you are a tough businessman, you should be able to do things like that. But they told me not to use it. Very interesting. Trump obviously meant for it to be on camera, and it rings familiar now, doesn't it? Ruxin, the other editor, recalled a revealing scene in season 3 when Trump was going through problems building his Chicago Trump Tower. There were problems with the caissons, the deep-seated footings for a tall tower that had to be drilled into the bedrock, he said. The subcontractor hired to build them was working on a multi-million-dollar contract, and there was a problem. They needed more money than initially thought. There was a budget overage. So, there was a scene, a roundtable discussion with his top people, including the construction supervisor representing the Trump properties. The caisson constructor is on the speakerphone in the center of the table, Ruxin continued. Trump is running the conversation and asks why they need more money. The contractor says there's money for the work in the overall budget. Trump is shocked that he knows this and asks, "Who told you about the budget?" The contractor says that Trump's staff sent over a copy of the budget. And Trump looks around at his people and says, "You sent the budget to this guy?" Ruxin recalled that the scene revealed what Trump could pay and that he wanted to pay less. So Trump quickly backs out of the conversation, he added. We're still filming with 2 cameras. It was decided in post that this made Trump look bad and it was cut. If it didn't make him look better, there was no place for it on the show. Interesting final story, though I don't think that was really exactly the blockbuster that I would have ended with, but that wraps it up. I thought that was really interesting stuff that, it teaches us a lesson about reality TV. It teaches us stuff about the way Trump himself works. I think we've kind of got that from other sources along the way. But I don't know. I just found that to be a really important follow-up to our discussion of yesterday and developing that theory of how damaging it ended up being, developing this genre of reality TV and continuing to call it reality TV. I don't blame anyone for it because it, I think, was relatively unforeseeable. Maybe we'll learn something different as history records what unfolds here. But it was still, I think, unforeseeable to say this show is going to launch this guy to the presidency. I mean, I guess if you have such a megalomaniac like this, in hindsight, you worry, oh my God, if we're empowering him like this, who knows where he's going to take this? I mean, for anyone else, it would be absurd. For him, it's absurd. But he's him. He does these things. This is not unusual for Donald Trump. This is already a guy who, with a straight face, says things like many people are constantly coming up to me on the street and telling me how terrific I am. And I say to them, I know that. Why don't you shut the hell up and get out of my, he would have no regard for anybody doing that. But this kind of guy, this effing guy, he'll take this stuff and run with it. You got to be worried about that. And now, I guess, going forward in reality television, people will have an eye on that. Am I going to accidentally make this guy president? What am I going to do? Weird story. Now, here is a Friday type story for you. I've been kind of pondering which direction to go with the rest of the show. But like I said, it was a good Friday type story, not breaking news, not something that immediately just came over the wires, but a good backgrounder and a good question about an ongoing issue and something that we're likely to see crop up again. I think we want to bring to your attention Mother Jones' work here, Alexander Salmon, Sammon, the reporter. This takes us back to the Standing Rock Dakota Access Pipeline standoff, an issue that has come up tangentially before on the show when an out-of-state law enforcement officer working at the protest had a gun fail incident, an accidental discharge, and we began sort of taking note of the fact that so many out-of-state officers had been brought in. Of course, this going on in North Dakota. Not a lot of anybody's up in North Dakota, including law enforcement officers. They've had to bring in officers from elsewhere, which is kind of a weird situation. And this piece asking, as the title well, I was going to say as the title implies, but this is the title. How did police from all over the country end up at Standing Rock? Subtitle begins to give it away, but of course there's plenty worth mining in the piece. A Clinton-era directive used mainly for natural disaster relief has drawn in law enforcement from faraway states. So this piece from early December, and well, let's jump right in. When protests at the Standing Rock Indian Reservation began in April, there were only a handful of activists camping out in defiance of the Dakota Access Pipeline project. As their numbers have grown into the thousands, so has the police presence confronting them. Police departments from 24 counties and 16 cities in 10 different states, including North Dakota, have poured into Standing Rock, according to the Morton County Sheriff's Department, the local law enforcement agency. It's interesting, of course, that you could even bring these guys in for a protest at all. I mean, I guess on the one hand, from the law enforcement point of view, naturally you want to make sure there are enough people there to at least, even up the numbers a little bit. If there's going to be thousands of protesters, you're going to want hundreds or even thousands of police too. But, it's kind of an interesting thing. If you're going to build a pipeline through a remote area like that, I don't know. I mean, I guess it's, in the end, there's nothing you can do about it, but there's something to the concept, I think, of confronting the police in a remote area and saying, we can draw numbers that will overwhelm your ability to use local or even in-state police. So, I mean, I don't know why there's no particular reason to think that you ought to be entitled to outnumber the police necessarily, but I like the concept nonetheless. And say, the long arm of the law can't rule everywhere by sheer force necessarily. Of course, then you fall prey to warlordism. It's a great thing to be able to try and do maybe in the remote areas of North Dakota, but I suppose in the end, if, so far, the outlook is pretty good. I don't think Trump's going to get us quite to, the Afghanistan-Pakistan border situation or Kashmir or anything like that, where the lack of a law enforcement presence or government power is going to have us, like I said, fall into warlordism. But, I guess you got to have backup against that. Anyway, we'll get back to the story here. It's rare for police forces to cross state lines to handle problems in neighboring places, much less travel more than 1,500 miles to respond to protests, as the St. Charles Parish, Louisiana Sheriff's Department has. So why is Standing Rock teaming with cops from across the country? Which in itself is also kind of problematic in the sense that you want your police force to be at least somewhat rooted in the locality it's working in. That's the ideal anyway. What experience have the St. Charles Parish, Louisiana Sheriff's deputies with Great Plains Native American policing? I don't know. Well, I guess if it's just go crack heads, I guess that works anywhere. So why is Standing Rock teaming with cops from across the country? The answer lies in an obscure federal law, naturally, that's usually deployed to help states deal with environmental disasters. There, it seems like a much better idea, don't you think? In 1996, then-President Bill Clinton signed the Emergency Management Assistance Compact, which is an acronym here, EMAC. I don't know if that's how they say it, but that's the way it comes out. The statute was created in response to Hurricane Andrew, which wrought an estimated $25 billion in damages when it hit Louisiana and Florida in 1992, necessitating large-scale interstate relief coordination. EMAC, an agreement eventually entered into by all 50 states, allows for states to share resources and coordinate emergency personnel in case of a crisis. The Good Neighbor Style law was invoked for disaster relief in Hurricane Sandy in 2012 and more recently Hurricane Matthew in 2016. Governors have almost always employed EMAC in the wake of natural disasters, but the bill contains a stipulation that makes it applicable during other types of emergencies, including, quote, community disorders, insurgency, or enemy attack, I guess you want to cover all your bases, but it does seem a little bit ridiculous. But hey, enemy attack. You don't want to be caught flat-footed on enemy attack. Send the cops. Send the St. Charles Parish, Louisiana Sheriff. I don't know. Well, anybody with guns at that point. And you might as well. They're equipped with military-style equipment anyway. Might as well make better use of it than they usually do. On August 19th, when North Dakota Governor Jack Dalrymple declared a state of emergency at Standing Rock, he relied on this language to issue an EMAC request. Per DSMOG blog, you know those guys, Standing Rock is one of the few times that EMAC has been called upon to respond to social activism. That is a little weird, isn't it? In April 2015, during Black Lives Matter protests in Baltimore in the wake of Freddie Gray's death, while in police custody, Maryland Governor Larry Hogan declared a state of emergency and sent out an EMAC request. About 300 state troopers from Pennsylvania and another 150 from New Jersey responded. The city racked up an estimated $20 million in extra policing costs. Since the state issuing the EMAC request is on the hook for the tab, North Dakota taxpayers will pay for the out-of-state officers at Standing Rock. This will include wages, overtime costs, meals, lodging, and mileage reimbursement. On November 2nd, North Dakota officials agreed to borrow $4 million to cover escalating policing costs and extend the state's line of credit for emergency law enforcement to $10 million. The state was already steering down a $1 billion revenue shortfall in 2016. It's a deep hole for North Dakota. Governor Jack Dalrymple said the state officials have asked for contributions from the federal government, the pipeline company, and any entity we can think of, though the federal government has thus far declined to pitch in. I guess that's good. North Dakota Emergency Services spokesperson Cecily Fong said told the Associated Press that total state law enforcement costs for the protests had reached $10.9 million as of November 22nd, while Morton County had spent an additional $8 million. Meanwhile, local courts and jails have struggled to process about 575 arrests. The increased law enforcement presence at Standing Rock has coincided with mounting concerns over police brutality, the deployment of military-grade equipment, including landmine-resistant trucks and armored personnel carriers, as well as the use of pepper spray, rubber bullets, and alleged strip searches led Standing Rock Sioux tribal chairman Dave Archambault II to ask the Justice Department to investigate civil rights abuses. Local and state law enforcement have increasingly taken steps to militarize their presence, to intimidate participants who are lawfully expressing their views, and to escalate tensions and promote fear, Archambault wrote in his letter. Some of the police details that have arrived in Standing Rock are among the largest recipients of military transfers from the federal government, including to according to an In These Times investigation. The South Dakota Highway Patrol has received $2 million worth of military equipment since 2006. The Highway Patrol. Well, okay, state police. Fine. I mean, it's no worse than handing out military equipment to anybody else, is all I'm saying. The Lake County Sheriff's Office in Northwest Indiana obtained $1.5 million worth of military equipment over the same time period, and I think is that the sheriff's officer who accidentally discharged the AR-15 might have been one of those guys. Can't recall if that's the right county or not. The Pennington County Sheriff's Office in South Dakota, the Anoka County Sheriff's Office in Minnesota, and the Griffith, Indiana Police Department have all received assault rifles, maybe he was from Griffith, through military equipment transfer programs as well. Police departments answer EMAC requests on a voluntary basis. Some forces, like Minnesota's Hennepin County Sheriff's Department, have been deployed to North Dakota amid objections from their local communities, and I think that's got to be weighed as well. By the way, let me know if I'm massacring any of the county names, but I don't know. I think we're pretty close with some of those things. Others are withdrawing from the action. A phone banking and email writing effort led Montana's Gallatin County Sheriff Brian Goodkin to turn his detail around before they even arrived at Standing Rock. Goodkin told Yes Magazine that people who contacted his department expressed concern that EMAC was meant to address natural disasters and catastrophic events, not for protecting a corporation's pipeline construction. You know, you might get some agreement among the sovereign citizen types out there, too. Just for that. Sheriff Dave Mahoney from Wisconsin's Dane County, who withdrew his force after 1 week, said he did so after talking with a wide cross-section of the community who all share the opinion that our deputies should not be involved in this situation. He said, "We have enough priorities here in our community to address." And I think that's probably a pretty good basis on which to challenge it. I don't know whether there are any other counties out there that still have personnel there that would be subject to being swayed that way. But a great call by the activists on that front. Not much more to it here. In fact, the story ends there. I just thought it was an interesting point to bring up. Let us get a grasp for under what authority all of these different police forces have ended up landing in Standing Rock, and alert you to an activist mechanism that you could use to diminish their numbers. Very interesting and always worth noting. A good Friday piece, I thought. I also have this other bit of background information that I've been holding on to for a little while from the Washington Post. Just another, in a long series of pieces that we've read on more publicized Donald Trump administration appointments. This one less noticed and usually a less controversial post, but not in this case, and not always. The White House counsel, very important job in a number of ways, but sort of one of the quieter posts, and I don't think it requires any kind of Senate confirmation. That's just sort of one of the personal advisory type roles. It's a little more official than, the basic things like they're handing out to Kellyanne Conway and Steve Bannon. They just have essentially made up posts of senior advisor, whatever. White House counsel, though, is sort of frontline in advising the president among a number of things. The legality of proposed programs or actions. The White House counsel's office was very much wrapped up in the question of trying to figure out it's nothing to figure out. The legality of the torture program under the Bush administration. It's illegal, sir, but, when you're George Bush, you say, well, give me something that makes it legal, and those are the guys you go to, the White House counsel, and, of course, the Office of Legal Counsel, an operation out of the Justice Department, doesn't reside in the White House, but they work in concert very often on similar tasks. If I understand the job of the White House counsel, is a little bit broader than the OLC's job, but a lot of that will be included in their purview. So anyway, the new incoming Trump administration White House counsel, Donald F. McGahn, M-C capital G-A-H-N, McGahn, I don't know, they probably doesn't say McGahn, right? McGahn. This is a piece written in the Washington Post by Ellen Weintraub, who served alongside, or in close proximity to, Donald McGahn at the Federal Election Commission. A lot of weirdos find their way to the Election Commission, I must say. I'm saying something about Weintraub, but I'm thinking about, didn't Hans von Spakovsky land there as well? I can't recall whether he actually made it to there or where they stuck him some other weird place. But the FEC, we've mentioned before, it's a disaster. The place is constantly deadlocked. And as it turns out, McGahn is one of the chief architects of that strategy, which is why Weintraub writes her piece under the title, Trump's pick for the White House counsel is wrong for the job. And, here you go. The White House counsel operates out of the public eye, but has the president's ear. Get it? Eye, ear. If we can work mouth and nose and then head, shoulders, knees, and toes into this piece, it's a Friday victory. I doubt we're going to get there, though. In the Trump administration, with the unprecedented multiplicity of conflict of interest challenges facing the businessman president, and that's generous, the job will take on added importance. As a Democratic commissioner at the Federal Election Commission, I, Ellen Weintraub anyway, served 5 years alongside Donald F. McGahn, President-elect Donald Trump's choice for the post. My experience may be instructive and disquieting. The best kind of experience to hear about on a Friday, right? The FEC's fundamental mission, as you may know, is to fight corruption by shining a light on money in politics, empowering citizens to assess their elected officials' potential conflicts of interest. Huge problem, of course, for Donald Trump. The FEC would only give us the smallest glimpse at those conflicts of interest. By the way, I think it's interesting that everybody still acknowledges that a campaign donation, which is limited, in its size, and for someone who purports to be a billionaire, it's limited to a pretty small size, and that everyone recognizes would create a conflict of interest. If someone gave you a gigantic or the maximum allowable political contribution and you did this favor for them, everyone would say, quid pro quo, it's an obvious pay-for-play situation, total conflict of interest. But as long as it takes place outside of the campaign context, everybody's shrugging. I don't know what kind of activity this is. I can't put a finger on it. Anyway, sounds like an area ripe for exploitation by McGahn, but the bigger exploitation can be found over at the White House counsel's office, I guess, so he's headed over there. The FEC's fundamental mission, of course, to shine a light on all of this. From the moment he walked in the door in 2008, McGahn made no secret of his disdain for the agency, its mission, and the commission's staff. And in that, he shares quite a bit with, the people appointed to head every other government agency. Almost without exception, those who have been named to cabinet posts are famous for, or semi-famous anyway, for having advocated for their destruction. The six-member FEC, McGahn corralled his two fellow Republicans into a rigid voting bloc, promoting gridlock and delay. Remember, of course, in the name of fairness. Back in the day, they thought this was an obvious, on its face, a fair approach to handling these things. We are going to statutorily insist that the FEC be 1/2 Democratic nominees and 1/2 Republican nominees. That way, they're sure to be bipartisan and fair. But of course, things have run away from that ideal and have been far away ever since. Certainly the last 10 plus years, if not more. The strategy has instead been to use the statutory split to strangle the FEC and render it incapable of doing anything at all, even when the case is obvious corruption on its face. Ellen Weintraub knows. I'll let her tell you more about it. In decision after decision, McGahn ensured that the money flooding our political system grew ever murkier and the connections between donors and candidates harder to trace. How so? Well, let's take a look at some examples. Appointed to be an arbiter of campaign finance complaints, McGahn instead assumed the mantle of defense counsel, making an art form of devising Byzantine arguments against investigating alleged wrongdoing. That's the job, but he's arguing against doing it. Should we investigate groups that spend millions on political ads without disclosing a single donor? Not as he saw it, even though I think everybody would pretty much agree that's kind of what the FEC is there for. What do you mean without disclosing a single donor? I don't know. My three people are going to say no to that. That's what we're going to do. And you'll say yes, and we'll be deadlocked, and nothing will happen, and we win. When a wealthy donor chartered a plane to bring hundreds of volunteers to a candidate's fundraising event, could that possibly have been an in-kind contribution to the candidate? Of course, right? No. But again, McGahn says no and brings two other commissioners along with him. When making its decisions, must the commission blind itself to public information known by any reader of the Washington Post, for instance? Amazingly, according to McGahn, yes. Agency dysfunction was not a byproduct of McGahn's approach. It was the goal. In the wake of the Supreme Court's 2010 Citizens United decision, McGahn vetoed proposed rules aimed at ensuring disclosure of the sources of political spending, barring employees from being coerced to support their boss's political choices, keeping foreign interests, from influencing our elections, and addressing the new political powerhouses known as super PACs. I served on the FEC for 14 years with 14 commissioners. While disagreements are nothing new at the FEC, commissioners on both sides of the aisle used to understand that serving on a commission composed of 3 Democratic and 3 Republican appointees required compromise, and that it was our job to make the agency work. No other commissioner has been as intransigent, as hostile to other points of view, and as determined to undermine the law and the commission itself as McGahn was. The example he sets hampers the agency to this day. Was McGahn motivated by libertarian fervor, or by the sense that his partisans would take a more aggressive advantage of the rule-free zone he worked to create? I don't pretend to have a window into his motives, but the results are inarguable. During the 5 fiscal years before McGahn arrived, that would be 2003 to 2007, the Commission negotiated more than $16 million in civil penalties in major cases. Even as the cost of campaigns skyrocketed over the next 5 years, from 2009 to 2013, McGahn's relentless obstruction caused penalties to plummet 79% to just $3.3 million. By his final year, we could muster the votes to launch only 4 investigations. Wow. The White House counsel interprets a great many separation of powers issues, and here again, McGahn's tenure at the FEC gives pause. It is the role of commissioners to enforce laws adopted by Congress, unless and until they are struck down by the courts. But McGahn substituted his own view of the Constitution. As he once boasted, "I'm not enforcing the law as Congress passed it. I plead guilty as charged." And it's not just Congress McGahn ignored. Even though the Supreme Court resoundingly endorsed the benefits of disclosure in Citizens United, McGahn blocked all attempts to rein in unreported dark money spending. How will McGahn view his new role? Service as White House counsel is not a quest to unearth clever legal loopholes. It requires viewing public office as a public trust, where office holders aspire to the highest ethical standards. Well, that's going to go out the window, regardless of what they think they might get away with. With Congress unlikely to exercise robust oversight, it falls all the more to the White House counsel to ensure that the administration acts ethically and honorably. Well, you can just about forget about that. Interesting, though, just to kind of loop back on the observation she makes actually in the previous paragraph. It's just very interesting that the evolution of the role of commissioner, as McGahn saw it certainly, the idea previously being, well, okay, there's 3 of you and there's 3 of us, so anytime we want to do anything, we got to compromise. But the job is to make this place function. And his idea was, I want to make it not function. So that's much easier to deal with. And then, of course, there's also the idea that, the laws are written by Congress. We enforce them. And when there's a question about whether or not a particular view of, or in particular interpretation of the law is right or not, of course there's room for that on occasion, depending on the circumstances, but it's not supposed to be a perch from which you would pass on your constitutional interpretation, your theory of the law that's before you, or to strike down something you believe is unconstitutional on your own. You can, of course, make that case if something that you deal with at the commission makes its way through the courts, but this is not a place to put somebody who thinks that the Federal Elections Act is unconstitutional, and he'll therefore strike it down and refuse to enforce it. That's just not the role of the commissioner, except, it's not supposed to be, but McGahn says it is, and that does not bode well particularly if he's the last line of defense trying to stop Donald Trump from running roughshod over gray areas or black and white law for that matter. Congress certainly isn't going to insert themselves into it either. We found out the other day they're afraid to do anything. So, now you find yourself with another White House counsel who is going to be uncharacteristically aggressive. I mean, the White House counsel job essentially is a conservative one, right? It's your job to keep the president out of legal trouble, and they're ordinarily going to be just extraordinarily cautious. I say they're ordinarily going to be extraordinarily cautious. Yeah, I guess so. They don't want to be the ones pushing the envelope. Typically, now sometimes the OLC will hand you a memo that can make that case, but that's at least coming from outside the White House. It's coming from elsewhere in the executive branch. There's a little bit of distance there. This is going to be some kind of administration here. Wow. Well, okay. So what does she think's likely to come out? Well, she says the early signs are not promising. The president-elect has, of course, already asserted that the president can't have a conflict of interest. His inaugural team is peddling special access for million-dollar donors. During his campaign, the president-elect characterized our political system as corrupt and vowed to drain the swamp. The last time McGahn's job was to regulate corruption, he instead gleefully paralyzed the agency charged with enforcing the law. So, what are the odds that a White House counseled by him will take any credible steps to drain the ethical swamp? My experience with McGahn does not offer much basis for optimism. Tough assessment, but then again, tough luck to you. He's the White House counsel and there's nothing you can do about it. Now, delving even further into the past, maybe we have the proper follow-up article to the last piece. This one I've been holding on to since mid-November, November 15th, as a matter of fact, a Ryan Riley piece in the Huffington Post, something I definitely wanted to get to at some point, just a reminder of kind of what's at stake and what we'll be looking at in the first few weeks on into the first couple of years, I guess, of the Trump administration. DOJ civil rights lawyers ponder future under potentially terrifying Trump presidency. The Obama administration rebuilt the civil rights division. Now lawyers there worry Trump will tear it apart. Yeah, good worrying. Well placed. Lawyers in the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division, a branch President Barack Obama rejuvenated after the Bush administration neglected many of its key duties. In fact, I would say undermined and destroyed the work related to many of its key duties, are worried that President-elect Donald Trump's administration might, just might, dismantle the work they've done over the past 8 years. By the way, this will all be, of course, directed under Jeff Sessions, should he win approval as Attorney General. And I had a piece I was considering playing for you, but then it struck me that I would probably run into copyright trouble if I just played outright the entirety of the 1986 NBC News piece on the hearings on Jeff Sessions' nomination for a federal judgeship by Ronald Reagan. But I'll include a link to it for you to watch. It's just sort of remarkable to see people who later became his colleagues in the Senate excoriating him. And, of course, now that he'd be in position to oversee the Justice Department on top of all this and be the one at the head of the likely Trump push to dismantle the Civil Rights Division again, just seems rather amazing. So I'll supplement this piece with that one, at least in the summary of today's show, for your edification. Anyway, moving on here. Under Obama, the Civil Rights Division has fought Republican-backed voting restrictions, prosecuted anti-gay hate crimes for the first time, and mounted major investigations of police departments in Chicago and Ferguson, Missouri. Trump, who once suggested he'd instruct his attorney general to investigate the Black Lives Matter movement, but has called himself the least racist person around, has different priorities. He subscribes to the notion that there's a war on police, has called police the most mistreated people in America, and spoke about the need to give power back to law enforcement. Now, the government's top civil rights attorneys face a choice. Fight for what they believe in under an administration that shows every indication of being hostile to their division's mission, or quit. There are a whole lot of career attorneys who are determined not to let their work get dismantled by working twice as hard, by being total pains in the butt if people try to undo their work, said one DOJ official, speaking on the condition of anonymity. People recognize that the resources aren't going to be there and that the support isn't going to be there. But people really recognize that the importance of career line attorneys in the Civil Rights Division has never been greater. Former DOJ official Jonathan Smith, whose work included the Civil Rights Division's investigation into widespread unconstitutional behavior by the Ferguson Police Department, said he suspects many attorneys within the division are already preparing to depart. My guess is that Wednesday, that would be the day after the election, half of the division spent the day fixing up their resumes, he said. I expect that you're going to see, starting almost immediately, an outflow of very committed lawyers who are going to look for other ways to make a contribution and not stick through a Trump administration. I'm very concerned about what's going to happen to the Civil Rights Division and the progress that's been made on critical issues around criminal justice, he added. It's really quite terrifying. And remember, keep in mind, of course, that a lot of these people would ordinarily be protected from outright firing by the Trump administration. But if they leave, of course, that leaves their positions open. And there's, of course, following the Bush administration example, really just not much in the way of disincentive to filling those ostensibly non-political spots with political ideologues, especially ones who will be embedded and protected from purging in the next Democratic administration. What a terrific opportunity it is to leave them behind. Significant departures are virtually guaranteed, and it's too early to say just how many career civil rights lawyers at DOJ will stick around for the Trump administration. Civil Rights Division Chief Vanita Gupta recently told hundreds of employees that she's planning to stay on until Trump's inauguration on January 20th. And I guess that's about it. As of Tuesday afternoon, the Trump's transition team, this would be the Tuesday, I guess, after the election, the Trump transition team had not contacted anyone at the Justice Department, and DOJ officials hadn't been told the names of individuals on the Trump team. Many career attorneys are anxiously awaiting Trump's attorney general pick. We now know, of course, it's the execrable Jeff Sessions, which will give them a better sense of the president-elect's priorities and help them decide whether they could be more effective inside a Trump DOJ or fighting for civil rights from the outside. Opponents of the Civil Rights Division's work during the Obama administration, meanwhile, are salivating over the changes a Trump administration could bring about. The Civil Rights Division, which was founded in 1957, is one of the sections of the Justice Department that experiences the biggest changes during a presidential transition. Its work is often controversial, and its priorities reflect the politics of the administration in power. There are parts of the division's mission, such as investigating unconstitutional policing practices in local police departments, that many Republicans don't believe are part of the role of the federal government. In 2009, Obama's transition team found the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division demoralized and damaged by oppressive political appointees who were hostile to civil rights enforcement, according to the transition team report previously obtained by the Huffington Post. The report found the administration of former President George W. Bush had, quote, abandoned the division's traditional mission and goals, consistently sacrificed sound law enforcement principles for political ends, and waged an internal war against career employees. One Bush official, you'll recognize the name, Bradley Schlossman, was found to have packed the Civil Rights Division with conservatives he labeled, quote, right-thinking Americans, unquote. This was part of his plan to gerrymander all of those crazy libs, who he also referred to as commies and pinkos, in the division. In one email, Schlossman said that bitch-slapping Civil Rights Division attorneys really did get the blood pumping and was even enjoyable once in a while. He jokingly suggested that the DOJ should create an award in his honor, the Brad Schlossman Award for most effectively breaking the will of liberal partisan bureaucrats. What a nice guy. Unfortunately, he has facial hair that Donald Trump will hate. Under Bush, the section that investigates police departments had been micromanaged in a way that prevented it from formulating or pursuing a meaningful agenda, and had not used its authority to address systemic problems of police misconduct, according to the transition report. Much of that changed under Obama. The division has opened 23 investigations since the administration took office in 2009. By the way, just pause for a moment here. I know that there are a lot of people who were not even particularly thrilled with the reaction of the Obama administration to, in Ferguson. I think they did a fairly decent job in at least highlighting the problems in Ferguson and elsewhere. But I guess you should take note, the language of this piece makes clear that at least, I'm not certain what became of it, but we're talking about an administration that came in and had its transition team identify in 2008 the ongoing problems with managing the use of force and the respect for, or the lack of respect for, civil rights in police departments around the country. They recognized that it was a problem and that the DOJ's Civil Rights Division had been lacking and had been forced to be lacking in its oversight of this problem. I mean, I just point that out by way of saying, here is a fairly concrete example of the problem being on their radar well before it reached the popular, widespread, and that would include white consciousness in this country. I mean, I guess it's certainly no surprise, and it won't be any particular thrill to highlight that for black community activists who would say, well, of course it was on his radar. He's got eyes, and he should have, and it should have been on people's radar since, the 50s. It's been a problem for 100 years. So, gee whiz, it was on your agenda in 2008. Well, okay. You didn't really manifest it that clearly, but okay, we're glad for Ferguson or whatever. But for the rest of us, for whom, I don't know, I guess we're supposed to, I realize that the problem is that old, but it does feel like a new awakening to the problem on a more widespread basis, and I don't know. Maybe that's who will be impressed by the fact that the Obama transition team identified that from the outset as a problem area, something that needed to be addressed institutionally within the DOJ, not just institutionally out among the police forces of America. But there's certainly room to outflank that from the left as well. I don't know. To me, that's an interesting note. And nothing more. So we'll move on. Much of that, of course, as we said, changed under Obama. The division has opened 23 investigations. Certainly they could be opening 123, 223. But 23 investigations since the administration took office in 2009, and currently has 19 agreements with law enforcement agencies. It has conducted high-profile investigations of unconstitutional policing practices in cities such as New Orleans, Ferguson, and Baltimore, where police routinely performed unconstitutional searches and where officers who engaged in misconduct weren't held accountable, according to an August report. The biggest open question is what will happen to the ongoing investigation into the Chicago Police Department, which began 11 months ago. The investigation is the largest the division has ever conducted, and the DOJ has been telling residents of the city that the federal probe can finally make a difference in policing practices. It would be a heavy lift for the Justice Department to complete that probe before Trump takes office, and it hasn't been determined if the results of the investigation will be announced before Trump's inauguration. Interesting question here. Do you think Trump finds any particular political advantage to knocking Chicago versus damage from knocking police in Chicago? I wonder how he'd handle that one. Trump suggested during a debate this year that the ability of people to sue when they experience excessive force was enough. Everybody sues, right? Individual civil rights lawsuits, even when successful, this notes parenthetically, often fail to address widespread misconduct and prevent future unconstitutional arrests, injuries, and deaths. Yes, you have to do it on a case-by-case basis. If there's any glimmer of hope for civil rights advocates, it's that Trump hasn't been very specific about his policy beliefs on civil rights, even as he has used rhetoric that makes them cringe. Former Democratic presidential nominee Hillary Clinton, you remember her, had pledged to beef up federal oversight of police departments across the country by pumping resources into the Civil Rights Division. Trump, however, hasn't really laid out a detailed policy beyond saying that the federal government should not dictate to state and local law enforcement or interfere unless invited in by appropriate authorities or when verifiably improper behavior is clearly demonstrated. High-profile Trump supporters with backgrounds in law enforcement don't give civil rights advocates much hope. Rudy Giuliani, who has been mentioned as a potential attorney general pick, has called the Black Lives Matter movement racist and anti-American. Another potential nominee, Senator Jeff Sessions, now is the nominee, has called groups like the ACLU and the NAACP communist-inspired and un-American, in addition to reportedly making racist comments that led to his rejection as a federal judge in the 1980s. Trump has been surrounded by law enforcement surrogates like Sheriff Joe Arpaio of Arizona and Sheriff David Clark of Wisconsin, whose record on civil rights leaves advocates concerned, to say the least. Steve Bannon, Trump's chief strategist and senior counselor, does not believe there's a systemic race problem in the United States. There are many ways the members of the Trump administration could blunt the impact of civil rights attorneys. They could starve the division of resources. They could shift their work. During the Bush administration, lawyers were assigned immigration cases instead of civil rights work, and they could flat out overrule them. You can kill the civil rights agenda in a lot of ways that still allow you to have a public face and a propaganda face that gives you cover, Smith said. It's a scary time coming up. Opponents of the Civil Rights Division's recent work are already making plans. Robert Romero of Americans for Limited Government said that a Trump administration could end what he characterized as a takeover of police departments. The rule of law starts at the top, and with a President Trump, you can bet police will get a green light to go back to work and make America safe again, he wrote. No more putting targets on cops. Well, that's one way of looking at it. Former Civil Rights Division attorney J. Christian Adams, one of the right-thinking Americans that Schlossman hired, wrote that there are few places as swampy as the Civil Rights Division. That's his version of draining the swamp, right? He encouraged Trump's team to take a number of steps to crack down on the division and to use civil service laws to go after its members. There are some areas where civil rights experts don't expect to see such dramatic shift, such as in prosecutions of individual law enforcement officials on civil rights charges. That's individual law enforcement officials. The criminal section of the Civil Rights Division has brought more than 480 civil rights cases against law enforcement officers under the Obama administration, compared to 468 during the Bush administration. So not a great difference there. But outside groups already consigned to the fact that they're about to lose a key ally within the federal government. They are already consigned to it. It's hard to imagine the Trump administration, for example, arguing that cash bail is unconstitutional when it fails to account for poverty, as the Obama administration did in August. Several other DOJ initiatives, including a letter meant to curb the illegal enforcement of fines and fees in municipal courts around the country, another of the great discoveries in the many seething undercurrents in Ferguson and the surrounding area. That would never have happened under an attorney general like, say, Giuliani, wrote Thomas Harvey, the executive director of the St. Louis-based organization Arch City Defenders, in a recent blog post. Kristen Clark, the president and executive director of the National Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law, said there was a deep and dangerous politicization of civil rights work during the Bush administration, and it was crucial to stop that from happening again. We will work to ensure that we do not revisit that dark era, and we will push to ensure that there is continued enforcement of our nation's civil rights laws, Clark said. It took years to undo the damage that resulted from the politicization of the Civil Rights Division's work between 2000 and 2008. Our nation will not benefit, and our democracy will suffer if we were to return to that era again. Well, I think we might. Smith, now the executive director of the Washington Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights and Urban Affairs, sees dark times ahead within the Civil Rights Division. Although he's somewhat hopeful that the protest movement is going to inspire the changing social conditions needed to help civil rights lawyers bring about change through courts, the Civil Rights Division under Trump will not be the same. Rather than having an ally in the Justice Department, Smith said, it will be an opponent. And it can be an awfully strong opponent at that. We've discussed a number of times on the show that this is, well, a lot like the FEC in that there are just structural elements of the way civil rights law works, of the way DOJ works, the way the Voting Rights Division works, that were just simply designed in and for another time, right? Just as the FEC's even 3-3 partisan split was at the time an obvious gesture of good governance and goodwill and fairness on its face, a pledge of fairness up front that itself made the functioning of the commission that much more likely. It now has been stood on its head and makes the functioning of the commission impossible. Similarly, and again, we have discussed this before, the structure of DOJ, the structure of the law that they enforce, the way courts are asked to approach interpretation of the law. I've given the example before of voting rights issues and the DOJ's hand in, previously, in pre-approving the redistricting plans for, the former Confederate states, where there's been a history of discrimination, and that the process laid out by statute was that if the DOJ were to give its approval to a new plan, but there were still objections to it by, the people most closely affected by it, the people from the district, if they wanted to appeal the decision or to sue over the new districts as proposed, if the DOJ had granted its pre-approval, the burden of proof for the plaintiffs in a case like that was overwhelming. You had to prove that essentially that it had been mistakenly given, that it had been given arbitrarily or for political reasons, and as opposed to, it's no longer a question of, well, take a look at the actual effects here and how discriminatory it is. We think that they perhaps used the wrong standard in judging that, and we encourage you to look at it this way instead. In other words, we still think it's discriminatory. It's interesting academically, but it's not of interest to the courts. The courts are programmed by the statute, essentially, to say when the DOJ gives its pre-approval, you've got to prove that there was some malicious intent, or at least some arbitrary reason for them to go ahead and say that they approved of it. In other words, the assumption is that the Department of Justice takes this job seriously and won't just for political reasons at the direction of a politicized department or at the direction of a overly political attorney general or president, for that matter, won't simply take a facially obviously discriminatory plan and give it its rubber stamp just to buy the benefit of the doubt of the courts. It just wasn't contemplated back when these statutes were designed. That just wasn't done. It was too far outside the norms. Couldn't be contemplated. And of course, between 2000 and 2008, that's exactly what the Bush administration Voting Rights Division did. And Schlossman was at its head, and Van Spakovsky advised, and the entirety of the operation was all about doing exactly that, saying, yes, the political appointees will overrule the staff attorneys who see the obvious discriminatory effects of the proposed redistricting plans and recommend that it be rejected. And instead, the political appointees who sit at the top of the hierarchy overrule the staff attorneys and say, we are going to give it our approval. And we know that by giving it our approval, it will make it virtually impossible for plaintiffs in those states to make their cases. And they may be able to prove that we did it for political reasons. But even that might not rise necessarily to the level of arbitrary and capricious that would be necessary to overturn our decision. In other words, the law that created the division gives us the power, essentially, to make it virtually impossible to be challenged from the outside, even if what we've done, in effect, is to approve a facially discriminatory plan. No one before dared do that, and now it's a matter of routine for Republican departments of justice. Extraordinarily dangerous, and you should expect to see it again. And not just in the Department of Justice. You'll also see it in other contexts, although I'm not as keenly aware of what sort of protections there might be specific to these other departments in law. I don't know offhand, but we've mentioned in the past couple of days, and we talked to Joan a little bit about the idea of the Trump transition team coming into the Department of Energy and asking about personnel who had worked on climate change issues, right? And trying to ferret out their names and identify them personally. No specific agenda announced, but again, this goes back to the idea that personnel in the agencies at a certain level, at the top levels, of course, the secretary is nominated by the president, and the chief, the undersecretaries and the deputy secretaries who carry out the daily missions are often also likewise political appointees, but the functionaries, the people who, of course, know where all the bodies are buried and know how to pull all the levers and make the place work and who have been there for years, are typically career civil servants protected from this kind of political environment. They can't be easily purged from the department in the service of the political ends. And when we say they can't be, we mean according to law, they're not supposed to be. They're supposed to have certain protections. But, of course, anything can be challenged, and you fire somebody, and, with a litigious president like we have coming in, he may be of the mind and say, they may or may not have these rights. We'll see. I'll fire them. And then they'll have the option to spend 2, 3, 4 years fighting the federal government to try to either get their job back, which doesn't pay all that well to begin with, or to get back pay. And again, it's not all that much to begin with. Will they really want to put $1 million into the prosecution of this case in order to get maybe, $300,000 back? Let's test that. Or worse, of course, why give them a cause of action at all? Why don't we instead accidentally release the list of names and addresses of all the people who have worked on this Chinese hoax of a policy and see if any of our favorite internet trolls would like to pay them a visit or run them out of town or what have you. Of course, we're now also hearing, did I put this one aside in Pocket? I can't recall whether I did or not. I think I was just so amazed that it was happening again. I may have been overwhelmed by it, and I didn't put it away. But latest reports are, and I'll try and give myself a note to find the report on this, that similar things happening now in the transition over at the State Department. The State Department transition team looking for the names of people who have been working on gender equality issues internationally on behalf of the State Department, just to sort of get a sense of who they are and where they are, and do they want to keep their red stapler, et cetera, right? No weird agenda, I'm sure. And speaking of internet trolls and the people that they might sick on others, I know we didn't cover the story, but I know that they did on the after show a couple of days ago. Where's the... oh, yes, right. It was the situation in Montana, Whitefish, Montana, where the vacancy that'll be created in the House of Representatives upon the assumption of duties as Secretary of the Interior by the current Congressman Ryan Zinke would create a vacancy in Congress for which dapper Nazi Richard Spencer is interested in running. And it was mentioned, I don't know how much I can't recall that we talked all that much about it, but I don't want to put it on the record here in the last couple minutes of the show. I got a report here from the local paper. As a matter of fact, the Missoulian white supremacist website calls for action in Montana. What kind of action are we talking about? Well, what kind of website are we talking about? White supremacist website, The Daily Stormer, that's the one we're talking about, you know them, has posted a call to take action. How? What kind of action? Take action against Jewish people in Whitefish, providing personal contact information and urging a troll storm against them. The story claims the vicious evil race has harmed the Whitefish business of Richard Spencer's mother. I guess he still lives at her place. It quotes a story from the British newspaper Daily Mail, and we're reminded by our listeners in the UK of what a garbage heap that is, that said Sherry Spencer said she is being forced to sell a building she owns in the small town because residents are rebelling against her son. In other words, nobody likes the dapper Nazi kid, and they're angry about his presence, they're angry about what he's doing, they're angry about the idea that he could run for Congress to represent them, and apparently, somebody says, they're boycotting her business somehow, or making it difficult for her to conduct her business in whatever way. And this obviously has to be a Jewish plot, and so therefore, Richard Spencer has provided the Daily Stormer through channels, I'm sure, with the names and addresses of the identifiably Jewish families of Whitefish, Montana, for them to be, visited or persuaded to end their economic boycott. Isn't that fantastic? What a wonderful story. By the way, when is big Mr. Tough Guy SEAL Ryan Zinke going to have his A Few Good Men moment and realize that he became a SEAL to fight for people like Willie or for the Jewish community of Whitefish, Montana? Oh, I don't know. I think he'll probably stay out of this one. But it's not the last such story, and I guess... do I need to go through the Whitefish story to give details? Of course, you probably, if you're a good, loyal Netroots Radio listener, you listened to their coverage on the after show the other day. But just to give you a flavor of the sorts of things that they've been doing, the Stormer has posted pictures of several Whitefish residents, including a child, with a yellow Star of David and the word Jude, German for Jew, attached to each photo. Of course, during World War II, Jews in Germany and Nazi-occupied territories were forced to wear such stars on their clothing. But then again, these weird, sad, alt-right / Nazi types just love to do things that are outrageous and provocative. So you can never tell exactly how far they're going to go. But that's part of the problem. Speaking of which, how about this? We'll wind up with this one. Walter Einenkel's piece his coverage of the rioting going on out of Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, but his coverage of it for, Daily Kos. Jewish family flees after being falsely blamed for school's cancellation of A Christmas Carol. This is just one of those seriously disturbing stories, all right? Even though right-wing bigots have been strangely proclaiming that we are all allowed to say Merry Christmas again, now that the Orange Führer is to be president, make no mistake, the war on Christmas is not over. In Pennsylvania's Hempfield School District, there have been reports that one of 2 Jewish families complained about the line, "God bless us, everyone," from the Charles Dickens classic A Christmas Carol, which led to the school canceling the production, which had been a tradition at the school. Those reports, though, are erroneous because when you think about it, that's a dumb thing to believe. The school has explained very clearly that the decision to cancel the production concerned the fact that it would cost them 15 to 20 hours of school time that they feel they need to spend on instruction. But that ain't what Joe Dum Dum heard. And here's an excerpt. A report on Lancaster Online says a Jewish family blamed for complaining about the Charles Dickens play has left the county in fear of their safety. After reader comments on the story, the report has reached, of course, national media outlets, including Fox News and the Breitbart News Network. If only there was some way for the Trump camp to communicate to Fox and to Breitbart that the story was incorrect. The Breitbart story is literally headlined, "School Cancels Production of A Christmas Carol Due to Complaints About Famous Line, Education Concerns." Pretty gross, right? The logic, he writes, is so tortured between complaints and education concerns. You wonder how someone who believes in Pizzagate could fall for it. Blech. The writer's name is Catherine Rodriguez, and like every writer over at Breitbart, you have to wonder if they're really all the bigoted, anti-Semitic, racist, scare white people bot puking out the crap they promote. In Breitbart's defense, a phrase I shan't ever utter again, some school leaders may have helped attempt to pass the blame on from themselves when the community around them got annoyed that they were canceling the show. Hempfield School District leaders confirm the original complaints are what led to an examination of the play that ended with its cancellation, but they claim it was not canceled because of the line, but because it took 20 hours of classroom education away from students. These unidentified district leaders seem to have misrepresented the complaints. The only thing the Jewish family did was ask if their child could be excused from having to sit through the production, which the school said sounded just fine, like reasonable people do. The Jewish family says that comments on the articles, combined with the climate of recent violent events surrounding an equally idiotic but clearly dangerous conspiracy theory we all know as Pizzagate, led them to leave for the time being. Here is what the school has had to write to clarify this insane event. They wanted to clarify that the decision to cancel the play was a building decision based on interactions between myself and the 5th grade teaching team. What a building decision is, I have no idea. Anyway, one rumor they've been addressing is that 1 or 2 families influenced the decision, and that's not true. Basically, this is all that happened here. One Jewish family said, hey, can my kid get out of sitting through the play and the practice time and all of that? And I don't know whether it had anything to do with the fact that he was Jewish. Maybe he just wanted to go to Little League practice. But gee whiz, Breitbart got a hold of the story, and all of a sudden there's a big Jew hunt on in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. And although normally you would try and sit tight and just hope that the crazies never show up, quite true, as the head of the family pointed out, are you going to sit on our hands and wait after something like Pizzagate? Do we wait for somebody to show up with an AR-15 outside of our house and maybe fire a shot into the house? Because we totally did complain about the mention of the word God because Breitbart said we did. Amazing situation. For a while I thought things might be calming down, but you gotta keep an eye on these things, disturbing as they are. Anyway, we'll close it out now, our Friday show. Thanks for listening. Glad I could put this together for you. Stay tuned for the after show coming up next.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
With David Waldman.
All right, well, enjoy the holiday weekend. You know, the one with Christmas in it. Oops, I can't say that. I'm so afraid. Well, you are allowed to say Merry Christmas again, so I'll say it. Merry Christmas. We'll see you again on Tuesday. And if we can put something together for Monday, fantastic, but it's going to be a tough one. Enjoy the long weekend.